We are truly delighted, really, to co-present at today's Women's Symposium on Leading Healthcare and Beyond that's hosted by McMaster's Faculty of Health Sciences. And I'm sure this is going to become an annual event in our calendars. So I just want to begin by thanking the Planning Committee for your tremendous efforts and the invitation to the Ontario Medical Association. So my name is Dr. Sharon Ball. You can see my co-chair, Dr. Clover Hemmons, and we are the co-chairs of OMA Women Committee. And so our committee's mandate is to promote, to sponsor, and to advocate for gender equity, to empower allyship broadly, and to push for system transformation that incorporates and leverages a gender lens with intentionality. And so, as we've discussed today, it has to be noted that the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted many existing inequities in our systems, bringing to the forefront glaring healthcare barriers to our Black and non-white racialized communities, and the disproportionate burden of this pandemic on women across all societal sectors, especially for women of color, must be acknowledged. A trend in intersectionality and inequity that we see perpetuated in academia, in politics, and healthcare leadership, where opportunity gaps and institutional culture remain fraught with barriers, but also, as we are hearing about today, have so much potential. The leadership reflections and journeys reviewed earlier this afternoon and the workshops in which you participated likely triggered emotions in many of you, faculty and trainees alike. Indeed, I shared in a clinical vignette some months ago at a partnership event between the SGFP, OMA Talks, and OMA Women on healing the gender pay gap, my own struggles as a woman in leadership. I related a story essentially of microaggression that even now brings with it a twinge of pain, that feeling of humiliation that accompanies injustice and validates imposter syndrome. And I also related how I did push back and honestly examined whether my ability to challenge the assumptions being made, namely that an older Caucasian man with no subject expertise looked more like a leader than I do. And note, this was said to me in 2020. To be honest, I pushed back because I was fed up, but also admittedly because I am a mid-career physician with allies. And I have not shared this publicly before, but I related the generalities of my challenge to Dr. Margot Mountjoy, a speaker today, as you just heard, and our dean at Waterloo Regional Campus. It was during a pre-booked phone call we had on a totally unrelated matter. And in sharing the gist of the event, I was able to lean on her similar lived experience. And this ability to have a sounding board and someone with shared experiences, especially in my case, in a sponsor, which is what she has been for me, allowed me to find my voice that day, something I commit to paying forward. So now more than ever, we all must commit to moving the dial in gender equity, whether it is addressing the diversity tax, the opportunity gap, or the gender pay differential, by citing, sponsoring, promoting, and ultimately connecting to one another, we can accomplish this. Together, we are all a force for change. I'm sure we felt that today, right? Someone to be reckoned with. And I will now turn it over to my co-chair, Clover.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing that. We're going to be sharing with you the vignettes that highlight some of the experiences that Sharon and I have felt. But I'm going to take you through what I call 10 recommendations to stop the stall. And that comes from a paper that I felt within me that I had to write after actually we practiced and became more aware after doing this healing the gender pay gap interprofessional experience. So I'm going to just start by sharing with you some of what is in the paper that I wrote, but it comes from the heart. So essentially, women in medicine are not exempt from the current pandemic, home or career complications. We know that, we've talked about that. Childcare and the second shift of household duties are still largely considered a women's problem. Many women have had to make significant changes to their work and their work output. Academic papers and research have suffered with the disproportional effects of the pandemic and specifically on women. And these outputs have stalled significantly. And with that goes opportunities for promotion, increased pay, and increased power and prestige, things men take for granted. Throughout Canada, for example, there are only 4, perhaps 5 women deans of medicine. And from that small sample, only 1 is a woman of color. This past year will affect long-term academic promotion. Papers on the gender pay gap in 2020 were very welcome data, since the myth of women not working hard enough or long enough was firmly disproved. Systemic biases were uncovered, again based on deep-seated, patriarchal, socialized norms. Measuring and reporting of gender and race in leadership, remuneration, and job appointments is a start, but what will it take to stop the stall of equity for women in leadership? Recognizing that socialization of our children starts early, starts with all of us, and contributes to perpetuating gender stereotypes and intersectional biases, we know talking about it alone will not change behavior. Appealing to emotions alone does not change overall behaviors. We need actions that beget movement. The second shift at home should not come with the pink ribbon. We must put women at the table where decisions are made. To do this, here is my call to action, which can be achieved in the next 12 months, approximately. So here are my top 10 recommendations to stop the stall. And using an intersectional lens, we must forge ahead with 1, putting women, particularly BIPOC women, on search committees, because representation makes a difference in selection. This helps to rebalance gender and hopefully other inequities in the longer term. 2, demanding transparency in job description and remuneration. 3, insisting that all staff be onboarded. This is not just in our hospital institutions. We're talking about in our offices and everywhere, with the minimum standard of implicit bias training and awareness to try to alleviate the unawareness excuse and response to some of the more blatantly misogynistic, racist, discriminatory, or sexual affronts. 4, pressing ahead for fair and equitable compensation. The gender pay gap is real, is not explained by hours of work, and has long-term consequences for livelihood, respect, and promotion. Put women on governance and search committees. Governance work is crucial to organizational direction and guidance. 5, continuing the fight against what I refer to as pink pointing, where women are pointed towards specialties deemed more suitable for their gender, are penalized when applying for certain specialties, which we probably know who they are, and are viewed as less if their working lives collide with their family responsibilities. Men often do not appear to have this issue. 6, measuring and reporting data around the lack of women as clinical chiefs of departments, corporate division heads, and equally paid leaders in every clinical or administrative medical setting. Lack of transparency leads to old, comfortable, non-diverse leadership, otherwise known by my friend as organizational preferentialism. 7, learning to leverage informal networks. There is a vast and unplumbed depth to these types of informal networks. Look at us today. We've learned from each other. It needs to be done. Make friends with writers and journalists. Become comfortable with writing yourself so you can share your insights and your experiences. Join organizations and committees that appreciate, nurture, elevate, and amplify women in their work. 8, continuing to build and support formal mentorship, allyship, and nurturing relationships that support excellence and skill acquisition for women in leadership. 9, advocating for a deliberate rebalancing of roles and positions where women are currently unfairly absent. Data has indicated that waiting for voluntary steps to rebalance gender inequities and power do not work. I've got the data. Find allies from everywhere to assist with this. Medicine must have fully integrated, clearly described practices for parental leave compensation. Research on recruitment practices has debunked the myth of pure meritocracy and exposed many of the biases inherent in recruitment processes. Many of these biases relate to privilege, patriarchy, and frank intersectional discrimination. And 10, becoming social media savvy. This mode of communication has been a boon for widespread connectivity. Leverage this tool for increased awareness of the cement, what I call the cement ceiling. The advantage of an enlarged digital footprint and outreach means we can lend support to each other across the globe, even when borders are closed. If we have an opportunity, can we please play those two vignettes now, Teresa?
Still on it. Gender discrimination comes in so many forms. It can be quite explicit, or it can be the function of implicit biases by both men and women physicians. And I've been reflecting about this on the topic of leadership. Last year, I was in an interview for a role I did subsequently get, when I was asked by a male physician who I know quite well about whether motherhood was a barrier for the role. Specifically, he said, as a busy working mother, did I feel that I would have the time and attention that the job required? And this narrative of mothering and motherhood, not parenthood, is one that's often leveraged as to create a barrier for advancement for women physicians. As another example, this past summer, I was doing some preparation for a town hall in the context of the pandemic and supporting primary care offices. And at the last minute, a male administrator reached out to me and said, I think this particular male physician would be better suited to presenting the material. And I said, well, what's your thought process? And he said, well, he looks like a leader. He kind of exudes leadership. And I thought that was curious because he hadn't really provided any leadership in this context. And I was able to push back. And I've been reflecting, why was I able to push back, and have I done that more increasingly? And I think certainly one of the reasons is that I've been supported by allies, and probably where I am in my career makes a difference as well. And I think we should be very mindful of that, and also of the power differential that is inherent in barriers to achieving leadership for women physicians as we work together to move the dial.
I was brought up to believe that I could achieve anything if I just worked hard enough. That was a fallacy. I was expected to achieve my aspirations as long as I adhered to the traditional work roles, which included housework, laundry, cooking, cleaning, including my brother's stuff. That notion died a quick death, I must admit. What I did not fully understand or appreciate until much later was that my voice, and perhaps your voice, is often not heard in meetings until someone else, usually a guy, repeats what you said. I noticed that in responding to aggression or conflict, you become labeled as the one with the problem or as the disruptor. And that our insidious socialization and not so hidden social agenda plays a tremendous part in our stalled or stopped work aspiration. We have intense guilt and conflict between paid work, unpaid housework, parenting roles, and care of the elderly or ailing loved ones, and it pushes you to adjust your career success trajectory. It is often very difficult to determine how much is gender and other intersectional biases such as race, age, or disabilities that act to stymie our success. But I do know that it's crucial that we have open conversations with our children and perhaps your friends' children so that these biases are unpacked and viewed for the discriminatory practices that they are. And in so doing, all of us can recognize that gender bias affects salary, career choices, employment policies, educational guidance and training, and family dynamics. Once they become transparent, once you label them, then you have an opportunity to change them for the better. That's why we're taking the time to talk about this. Thank you so much, Teresa, for showing them. I think they basically summarize much of what we've been discussing today. So there are several suggestions in the list that I provided. I urge you to choose at least one, or perhaps two that resonate with you. If we all commit to trying at least one suggestion over the next 4 weeks, we can accomplish a great deal. And with all of that, OMA Women thanks you for supporting women in the quest for leading healthcare and beyond.